They shoved me out of my wheelchair and into the mud, then laughed while filming it. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I dared to exist in their neighborhood in this skin in this chair. And, standing behind them, was Officer Trayson Hale, arms crossed, smirking in silence. That's when I knew they weren't just trying to humiliate me. They were trying to erase me. But they had no idea who I was or how many would rise when one woman refused to stay down. They laughed. Loud, cruel, unfiltered. The kind of laughter that didn't hide behind hands or hesitance. It was sharp, like the cold wind that whipped across my cheek as I lay face down in the mud, unable to lift myself up the wheels of my wheelchair still spinning uselessly behind me. I had just been shoved, yes, shoved, by a pack of teenagers who thought my presence on the sidewalk was a joke. One of them even filmed it. For the views. Look at her face, she's eating mud. One jeered, while another stopped the wheel to stop it from turning. Behind them stood a young girl in a cheerleader outfit, her phone held high, her designer boots untouched by the rain. She didn't laugh. She didn't help either. I was just the show. And behind her, I saw the man I would soon come to know too well. Officer Trayson Hale, broad-chested, pristine uniform aviators, even in a storm. And the sneer of someone who'd long forgotten compassion. He didn't stop them. He just stood there, arms crossed, nodding slightly. That nod, it broke something in me. I am Clarice Holloway, 64 years old, former nurse, widow, stroke survivor, paralyzed from the waist down since the day my car was run off the road by a drunk driver whose father knew someone. I live in the East Heights neighborhood, a place once beautiful, now forgotten, unless you're rich, white, or loud. I chose peace. I chose solitude. I chose to not be a burden. But that choice was taken from me the moment I wheeled past the new bakery on Lenox Street and was told, "You're blocking the entrance, Grandma," just before they shoved me and my world into the mud. It could have ended there. It almost did. But mud has a way of awakening old roots. And that was the day I stopped choosing silence. 2 weeks before the incident, I had been gardening. Just me, my raised beds, and my old radio humming Luther Vandross. My hands, though arthritic, still knew how to coax life from earth. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I was planting tomatoes. But that's when Lydia Burns saw me. She lives across the street, president of the Neighborhood Beautification Council. A woman whose smile could slice glass and whose voice only sounded friendly when it was being recorded. Ms. Holloway, she called with a wave that felt more like a warning. We've received concerns. The planters violate the aesthetic guidelines. They don't match the HOA palette. I blinked at her, still holding my trowel. I had painted them myself. Yellow, orange, red. Bright colors for a dark street. They uplift, I said softly. She replied with one word. Remove. Lydia is not just a neighbor. She is a gatekeeper. No one voted for her. She claimed the title when the real president moved to Florida. And, like so many others who hide behind clipboards and HOA newsletters, she made rules up as she went along. One day, it was the color of my planters. The next, it was the wind chimes on my porch. Then, it was the excess noise from my radio during the day. I adjusted. I lowered the volume. I painted the planters beige. I even removed the birdhouse my late husband had built with his hands after chemo wore him down. I told myself it was easier to comply, that maybe if I kept my head low, they'd leave me be. But fear feeds tyrants, and nothing about Lydia's empire was ever satisfied. The incident with the teens wasn't isolated. It was the crescendo of whispers, side-eyes, and mockery that had followed me for years. They saw me as frail, alone, easy to ignore, easy to film, easy to push. But they didn't know what I had been through. They didn't know the woman I used to be. And they certainly didn't know that after the stroke I taught myself how to use voice-to-text software, how to read legal codes, and how to find people who still believed in justice. That evening, I sat alone in my living room, soaked, shaking the mud drying on my arms and in my hair. My wheelchair leaned against the doorway like it too had given up. But then I remembered the voice. My husband's voice, long gone, but still tucked away in voicemail messages I refused to delete. I played one, "You're stronger than you think, Clarice. And when the time comes, you'll know what to do." I closed my eyes. I knew. I went online, found the footage. It had gone viral on a local page titled "Hood Laughs." The caption read, "Old Lady Eats Mud, LOL Wheelchair Edition." Over 400 shares. Comments like, "She probably deserved it," and this made my week. I felt sick, but I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was the comment beneath it. A simple sentence. "This isn't funny. This is abuse." It was written by a boy named Isaiah Daniels, 15, student at Franklin High. I messaged him. He replied within 10 minutes. I filmed it. I didn't laugh. I felt horrible. I want to help. I stared at his words. I didn't trust easily, but something told me this boy was different. We arranged to meet at the community center. When I wheeled in, he stood up tall, skinny, nervous. He held out a USB. "This is the original video," he said. "It shows the officer. And their faces." I never shared this one. I looked into his eyes. He wasn't lying. And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. The USB felt heavier in my lap than its size allowed, like it held not just a video, but 1,000 unspoken screams I had swallowed over the years. I didn't plug it in that night, not right away. I stared at it first, let my fingers trace its edges. Isaiah had given it to me so quickly, like he was getting rid of guilt. But I held it like it was a weapon. Not of violence, but of memory, truth, and justice. I finally clicked it into the side of my aging laptop, and the screen flickered awake like it knew something was about to change. The video opened with static and wind, the kind that rattles trees before the storm starts. Then came the voices. Boys, teens. Young and reckless, the sound of sneakers scraping pavement. "Yo, check her out," one yelled. The camera swung and locked onto me, just a blur at first, rolling slowly down Lenox Street, the rain already starting to fall. My hood was up. I remember that day. I was going to the pharmacy. My prescriptions had doubled. So had the glares. Then came the moment. A sharp push. The jolt. My wheelchair twisted sideways. My hands flailed and I hit the pavement mud gravel shame. And then the part no one else saw, Officer Trayson Hale walking up behind them, chuckling. "You boys got her good," he said, and I froze. I rewound, played it again. "You boys got her good." The man in uniform, the one sworn to protect. His voice flat, amused, devoid of empathy. There was no helping hand, no reprimand, just complicity. I leaned back in my chair, winded by the truth I had always felt but never caught in pixels. I stared at the paused frame, my body crumpled the teens, high-fiving the officer watching. The screen burned with more than just image. It burned with resolve. The next morning, I rolled to Councilwoman Janet Ray's office. She was one of the few black leaders left in the district who hadn't sold their soul for donations or clout. Her secretary almost dismissed me until I pulled out the USB and said, "Tell her it's about police misconduct caught on tape, and tell her the victim is me." I expected to be turned away, but 10 minutes later I was inside. Janet Ray looked like a storm bottled in silk. Tall, mocha-skinned with dreadlocks swept into a crown and eyes that missed nothing. She listened quietly as I recounted every detail, mud, laughter that clipped the officer. I handed her the drive. She didn't flinch, just inserted it into her laptop, watched, paused, replayed. When it ended, she exhaled deeply. "Clarice," she said, "you've just unearthed a bomb." "I'm not looking for revenge," I whispered. "I just want to be treated like a human being. I want them to know I matter." "You will," she said. "But this isn't just about you anymore. This is a system. This is a disease." Within 48 hours, she released a public statement. She didn't name names, but she referenced the video, the abuse, the laughter. Local media picked it up, then regional, then national. And suddenly, my name was trending not as a punchline, but as a headline. That's when the threats began. Anonymous calls. "You're lying. He's a decorated officer. Notes on my porch wheel away while you can." But I didn't stop. If anything, I dug deeper. Isaiah and I started compiling everything, other videos, screenshots, testimony from seniors in the neighborhood who'd been harassed, dismissed, insulted. We mapped a timeline of quiet abuse that stretched back 5 years, all linked to Trayson Hale and the teens he let run wild, because they were the right kind of kids, suburban white, just being boys. And what was I, a black woman in a wheelchair? A nobody. Until now. The day the media leaked Trayson's name, I watched it unfold from my living room with a strange mix of fear and satisfaction. The anchor's voice trembled. "East Heights officer under investigation after viral video shows him encouraging assault on disabled resident." The screen showed a blurred frame of my body in the mud. I felt exposed, but I also felt seen. I thought Lydia Burns would be silent. Instead, she doubled down. She wrote a letter to the HOA claiming I had incited conflict by inviting attention. She called my garden a breeding ground for tension. Then she tried to get my property classified as non-compliant, threatening eviction. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a cop or a video. It was about power. Who gets to use it? Who gets to silence whom? And that's when I made a choice. I was going to take them all on. I contacted a civil rights lawyer named Marshall Keene, retired but still fierce. He showed up at my house in a weathered corduroy blazer cane, tapping like a gavel. After reviewing everything, he looked at me and said, "You've got enough to start a class action suit police misconduct, HOA, intimidation, ADA violations. But it'll cost you. Not just money, sleep, friends, peace." I stared at my garden. The wind chimes Lydia hated were still, but I could hear them in my heart. "I've already lost peace," I said. "Now I want dignity." He smiled. "Then let's give them hell." By the end of that week, my name was no longer a hashtag. It was a petition, a lawsuit, a march. On a rainy Saturday, over 200 people stood with me outside East Heights Police Precinct. Young and old. Black, white, brown, wheelchairs and strollers. Someone held a sign that read, "Mud washes off injustice doesn't." I wept. Officer Trayson Hale was placed on leave, but Lydia Burns, she called it mob behavior. She sent an HOA-wide letter calling for my expulsion in the name of community harmony. I pinned her letter to my front door. Then I turned on the sprinkler. There comes a moment in every war, whether waged with bullets or silence, when the enemy realizes the one they thought weakest was simply waiting to rise. I wasn't supposed to be a warrior. Not at 64. Not after a stroke. Not in a wheelchair. But when they pushed me into the mud and laughed, something ancient stirred in my bones. It was the strength of women who had picked cotton and raised empires, who had buried sons and built futures. They pushed me down, but I stood taller than I ever had. The morning after the march, I rolled outside and found my garden destroyed. The planters were shattered. My tomato vines ripped from the soil. A note taped to the stump of my rose bush. Go back to where you came from. I sat there, letting the wind dry the tears on my cheeks. Lydia Burns watched from her porch across the street, sipping tea like she hadn't orchestrated a crime. I didn't give her the satisfaction of breaking. I turned, wheeled back inside, and called the news. That night they aired footage of me replanting. My hands in the soil dirt, under my nails defiance in every movement. The caption read, "Disabled Woman Rebuilds After Vandalism, Calls for Community Protection." Messages poured in. Strangers offering to send seeds. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years, dropping off flowers, gloves, even coffee. The narrative was shifting. I wasn't just a victim. I was a mirror, showing people what they'd allowed to rot while they mowed their lawns and waved politely. And still Lydia fought. She filed a formal complaint to have me removed from the HOA rolls, claimed I was endangering neighborhood reputation. She cited bylaws from a 1997 addendum no one had read. But she made one mistake. She sent the letter via email, and Isaiah, bless his tech-savvy heart, forwarded it straight to Janet Ray and Marshall Keene. That week, Janet Ray called a town hall. It was packed. Standing room only. Cameras everywhere. Lydia arrived in pearls and poise, flanked by her husband, a man who hadn't spoken publicly in 15 years, but somehow always voted her way. Officer Trayson Hale was noticeably absent. Suspended under investigation, but still drawing a salary. I rolled in quietly, Isaiah beside me, holding the original USB in his palm like a sacred relic. The room fell silent. Janet stepped to the podium. "We are here," she said, "to discuss the incident involving Ms. Clarice Holloway, the conduct of Officer Hale, and the pattern of targeted harassment in East Heights." She gestured to a projector screen behind her. "Let's begin with the truth." The video played. There was no noise except the sound of my body hitting the ground. The gasp in the room came not from my fall, but from Officer Hale's words. "You boys got her good." People turned, looked at Lydia, looked at me, and something shifted. When the video ended, Janet didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence was louder than outrage. Then Lydia stood. Calm, composed. "This is unfortunate," she began. "But I believe Miss Holloway has weaponized her condition for attention. She has violated HOA rules repeatedly. She has disrespected the standards we all agreed to uphold." Someone booed. Another yelled, "She's the only one planting anything on this block." A woman from the back stood up. "Lydia," she said, her voice shaking. "My son uses a wheelchair. Are you saying his life is worth less if he plants roses that aren't beige?" Lydia faltered. For the first time, her armor cracked. I didn't plan to speak, but I wheeled to the front anyway. My voice came steady, clear. "I'm not here because I want to fight. I'm here because I was pushed into the dirt and no one helped. I was mocked, laughed at, ignored, and then told I was the problem. All because I dared to exist where someone thought I didn't belong." I paused. "You don't have to like me, But if you stay silent, you're siding with the ones who think shoving a disabled black woman into mud is entertainment. The applause started small. Then it grew. Janet took the podium again. Effective immediately, an independent review board will investigate HOA practices in East Heights. Officer Hale will face formal disciplinary action. And Ms. Holloway, she turned to me, will be awarded a grant to restore her garden with community support. Lydia stormed out. No one followed. The next day, teenagers from the local high school came to my yard. Not just Isaiah, others too. Black, white Latino. They brought mulch planters' seeds. One girl brought a speaker. She asked if I liked Aretha. I smiled. Play it loud. As they worked, I watched from the porch. One boy looked up and asked Miss Clarice, "Why didn't you just move away?" I looked at the sky. "Because this is my home. And you don't leave your home just because the walls get ugly. You repaint them. You rebuild. You stay. You can tell when a storm's about to break not just by the clouds, but by the way the world holds its breath. The sun will shine too still. The wind will hush just enough to feel unnatural." That's how the neighborhood felt the week after the town hall. Still. Too still. Like the calm before fury. They said I'd won. Said the worst was over. But those who have lived long enough in this country, especially in this skin in this chair, know better. Winning is just a new beginning. And sometimes the fallout is the real battle. The grant arrived in a gold-trimmed envelope delivered personally by Councilwoman Ray. "This comes from the Community Reclamation Fund," she said. $10,000 to rebuild your garden, build a ramp, upgrade your home security." I thanked her. We hugged. Cameras clicked. Journalists nodded. And just like that, I became the poster woman for resilience. But resilience, I've learned, doesn't pay off your trauma, it just makes it prettier for the press. That night, a brick shattered my living room window. Wrapped in paper, 4 words scrawled in red: "Wheel away or die." I didn't scream, didn't cry. I called 911. Guess who showed up? Not Officer Hale, thank God. But one of his poker buddies. Officer Kent, ruddy-faced, 50-something, thick drawl. He stepped over the glass and muttered, "Kids these days." Took a lazy glance around. "You provoke people enough, this kind of thing happens," he said. I didn't respond, just handed him the brick. He shrugged. "No prints, I'm sure. You want to file a report?" "Yes," I said. He rolled his eyes. "Suit yourself." Isaiah showed up 10 minutes after the squad car pulled away. He didn't speak, just started cleaning the glass. Then he stopped. "Ms. Clarice," he whispered, holding something up. A small black camera nestled under the porch rail. "They're watching you." He disconnected it carefully. I stared at it, heart hammering. I thought about all the hours I sat on that porch in my housecoat, reading, napping, drinking tea. Who had watched me, recorded me, who had shared it? That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I opened the folder Marshall Keene had given me weeks earlier, a thick file of court cases, HOA abuse scandals, ADA lawsuit precedents. At the bottom, a yellow sticky note: "Your silence is their safety." I read every word until dawn. The sun rose behind torn curtains. I wheeled into the kitchen and brewed strong coffee. Then I called the reporter who had interviewed me last month. "Let's go deeper," I told her. The next day, an exposé dropped. Terror in the suburbs' disabled woman faces, escalating threats after speaking out. They printed the brick, printed the note, showed the camera Isaiah had found. By noon, the neighborhood email thread exploded. Some offered support. Most stayed silent. But a few the kind started demanding balance. One message from a man named Leonard Fitch read, "Clarice Holloway has brought nothing but division to East Heights. Her accusations are inflammatory. Her victimhood is performative. Performative. That word, it scraped my ribs like rusted wire. Like I had staged the fall. Like I had planted the camera myself. Like the mud was makeup and the tears were lighting tricks. Lydia Burns, of course, didn't condemn the brick. She condemned the coverage. Sent another HOA-wide letter. We must protect our community's reputation. Sensationalism only harms property values. She was right about one thing: property values were dropping. Because people were talking, buyers were pulling out. The facade of perfection Lydia clung to so tightly was cracking. And when desperate people crack, they lash out. 3 nights later, I woke to a crash on my porch. I rolled out and found my garden destroyed again. Planters, upturned flowers, crushed tomato cages bent like broken ribs. The note this time was nailed to the railing: "You can't grow here." But something else was left behind. A glove. Leather, red, small, a woman's glove. Isaiah and I took it to Marshall. He raised an eyebrow. "DNA. We won't get it from the cops," I said. He nodded slowly. "But I know someone in forensics. Retired. Owes me a favor." While we waited for results, I rebuilt. Again. But this time I did it differently. I didn't plant just for myself. I called neighbors, invited kids, mothers, teenagers. Anyone who felt pushed out, looked over, silenced. They came, in droves, with seeds and stories. One girl said her autistic brother had been denied entry into the neighborhood park by Lydia's husband. Another said their grandmother had been fined for putting up holiday lights too early. We planted roses, sunflowers, lavender, built raised beds in the shape of a peace sign. The kids painted signs, "We belong here." Love roots deep. One read, "Clarice Strong." I didn't cry until I saw that one. 3 days later, Marshall called. "It's her," he said. I knew who he meant before he said the name. Lydia Burns. Yes, her prints are on the glove. The camera casing, too. I exhaled slowly. "We go public," I said. He hesitated. "It'll get ugly." "I've been in mud, Marshall. I know ugly." And so we prepared. Press conference, legal motion, restraining order, civil suit. We didn't go quietly. The next time Lydia opened her mailbox, she found a summons. The HOA board, once her puppet show, split down the middle. Half resigned. The rest called for a vote to remove her, and I planted marigolds. The courthouse smelled like old paper and colder justice. The kind of place that had never quite learned how to accommodate a woman like me. The ramp at the front was cracked. The door too heavy. The pews inside designed for the able-bodied. But none of that mattered. I rolled through the halls like I owned them, not because I did, but because I had finally earned the right to be heard. After all the mud, the bricks, the cameras, and the silence, it was time to speak. Not just for me, but for every quiet soul who'd been dismissed, discarded, and told they didn't belong. Lydia Burns sat across from me, her face frozen in that tight-lipped mask of false elegance. She wore all beige like always. Her red leather gloves were conspicuously absent. Instead, she clutched a file folder thick with what I imagined were accusations and alibis. Her lawyer, a smug man with slicked-back hair and a voice like melted plastic, whispered constantly in her ear. She never once looked at me. I suppose it's harder to maintain control when the one you thought beneath you is now eye level and not blinking. The courtroom was half full. Neighbors, press, strangers. A few of the teenagers who had once laughed at me now sat quietly in the back, their eyes lowered. Isaiah sat in the front row next to Marshall Keene, both of them alert and unflinching. Janet Ray had flown back in for the day, seated beside an aide, taking notes. Her presence was a silent reminder you are not alone. The judge, a black woman named Dolores Whitman, with gray-streaked locks and piercing eyes, opened proceedings with a voice that cut through the marble like gospel. "This is not just about dirt and flowers," she said. "This is about dignity. Let's proceed." Marshall began with the video. The original one. No edits, no blurs. It played on the screen for the whole room to see me rolling down the sidewalk. The teens taunting. The push. The fall. The mud. The laugh. Officer Hale's voice. "You boys got her good." A few people gasped. Some wept. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Then came the second video. The one from the hidden porch camera grainy footage showing a shadowy figure creeping into my yard at night. Ripping flowers, smashing planters, and then, clear as daylight, the glove falling from her wrist. Red, leather, identical to the pair Lydia wore in every HOA newsletter photo. When Marshall presented the DNA match, Lydia's attorney objected, claimed the evidence chain was compromised. Judge Whitman lifted a hand. Overruled. Then she turned to Lydia. "Would you like to address the court?" Lydia stood slow and deliberate. "Your Honor, this is all a misunderstanding. I've dedicated years to preserving the integrity of our community. Ms. Holloway has disrupted that with dramatics, public spectacle, and now baseless legal attacks. I have never threatened her." I raised my hand. The judge nodded. I was shoved into mud. I began my voice steady. Laughed at, filmed, mocked. I rebuilt. And I was torn down again. Not because I broke rules, but because I didn't fit someone's idea of who belongs. This glove, this brick, this campaign of fear, it wasn't about property. It was about power. Lydia shifted, visibly uneasy. Did I disrupt the neighborhood? I said, eyes locked on her. Yes. But maybe the neighborhood needed disrupting. Silence. Then the judge spoke. "Thank you, Ms. Holloway. You have reminded us why this court exists." She recessed for deliberation. We waited. 22 minutes later, Judge Whitman returned with her ruling. "Based on the evidence, I am granting a protective order in favor of Ms. Holloway. Furthermore, the court finds grounds to recommend civil penalties for harassment, property damage, and violation of ADA rights." She paused. "I am also referring this matter to the State Ethics Committee to investigate misuse of HOA authority." Lydia's lawyer turned pale. Lydia just sat there stiff, staring forward, her jaw locked. As I rolled out of the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Meeks shoved. Flashes flared. One asked, "Do you feel justice has been served?" I turned slowly. "No," I said. But this was a start. Justice isn't a ruling, it's a reckoning. And this town just got a taste. Later that evening, I returned home to find a crowd gathered outside my gate. Neighbors. Kids. People I didn't know. Someone had painted my fence. Not graffiti art. A mural of my face, mid-smile, surrounded by sunflowers. At the bottom, it read, "The woman they couldn't push down." And in the center of the crowd stood Lydia's former allies, now standing with folded arms, their clipboards gone, their silence broken. Janet Ray hugged me. Isaiah cried. Marshall tipped his hat. I stood, or rather sat on the steps of my porch, and said the words I hadn't dared believe I'd say again. I'm home. The morning air had that crisp hum, the kind you only feel when something's been cleansed not by rain but by truth. My garden, once a battleground of broken pots and shattered hope, now bloomed like a symphony. sunflowers turned toward the light. Lavender danced in the breeze. The tomatoes I had thought lost were climbing again, defiantly red, unapologetically vibrant. But it wasn't the flowers that had changed, it was the soil itself. It had absorbed my fight, my tears, and grown something new, a place where belonging could take root. Word had spread fast after the court ruling. Lydia Burns resigned from the HOA 2 days later, citing health reasons. But we all knew it wasn't her blood pressure that brought her down. It was the pressure of people finally standing up. The vacant look on her face that day in court had burned into memory. A woman who built her identity on control now stripped of it like a mask after the show. Yet I didn't celebrate, because survival doesn't mean forgetting, and winning doesn't erase wounds. The vandalism stopped, but the echoes lingered. I'd flinch every time the wind slammed my gate. I kept the curtains half drawn. Even with the cameras removed, I felt eyes on me. Trauma, I learned, doesn't ask for permission. It just lives with you quiet, curled in corners, waiting for nightfall. But I wasn't alone anymore. Isaiah came every afternoon after school, even when he didn't have to. We replanted marigolds side by side. He told me he'd changed his major to journalism. I want to tell stories that matter, he said. Stories like yours. I laughed, handing him a watering can. Then don't just write them. Live them. He smiled, and for a second I saw in him all the things that had once been stolen from me, youth, ambition, fire. And I realized maybe this fight wasn't just for me. Maybe it was for the Isaiahs of the world, for the girls told to quiet down, for the grandmothers shoved to the curb, for anyone who had been made to feel invisible. The mural on my fence became a local landmark. Tourists stopped by. Reporters asked for interviews. A documentary crew showed up offering to turn my story into a film. I declined. Let the garden speak, I said. It's louder than I ever could be, but the fire within me didn't die. It simply changed direction. I began hosting gatherings every Sunday, community circles I called them. No agendas, just people, stories, healing, survivors of HOA abuse, parents of disabled children, LGBT youth, immigrants, elders, the forgotten and the pushed aside. We shared tears, laughter, poems, songs, and somewhere in that space my front yard became something more, a sanctuary. One Sunday, a woman in her 50s approached me with trembling hands. "My daughter has MS," she said. "She stopped leaving the house after what happened to you, but now she wants to plant roses." I took her hand, then let her, and tell her I'll come help dig the hole. Janet Ray came by that night bringing cornbread and news. "You did more than change a neighborhood, Clarice. You changed policy." The city had passed a new ordinance mandatory disability sensitivity training for all HOA boards. Fines for failing to accommodate disabled residents. Grants for inclusive gardening spaces. I blinked. She smiled. "You planted a revolution." But not everyone was clapping. Officer Trayson Hale had been officially terminated, but filed an appeal. He accused me of character assassination, claimed the video had been taken out of context. His lawyer argued that my public platform had incited hatred against him. I laughed bitterly when I read that. "He's lucky I'm not inciting justice with a megaphone," I muttered. Marshall Keene looked me dead in the eye. "You ready to go back to court?" I nodded. "Let's roll." The second case was quieter. No press frenzy. No murals. Just a small courtroom and a reckoning. I testified. So did Isaiah. So did 2 other women who had been harassed by Hale in prior years. They hadn't spoken before, but now they stood. One said he called her a loud-mouth cripple. Another said he ignored her calls for help during a break-in because she had mental health issues. Hale didn't speak once. The judge ruled swiftly, appeal denied. All claims dismissed. His badge was permanently revoked. When I rolled past him outside the courthouse, he looked at me, lips tight shame, clinging to his skin like sweat. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply said, "The mud washes off, but the stain that's yours to carry." The fire within me that once burned in protest now glowed with purpose. I partnered with local schools to build accessible gardens, spoke at town halls, helped 3 families win ADA settlements, and every morning I rolled into my garden, touched the leaves, and whispered, "You're safe now." The morning of the Harvest Festival, I sat at the edge of my porch with a basket in my lap and a breeze in my lungs, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace that wasn't borrowed. The sun crept through the leaves like a gentle witness, touching every petal, every sign, every brick laid back in place since the war we had fought without fists. My wheelchair was no longer a prison. It was a chariot. And behind me, my house, once targeted, vandalized, feared, had become a sanctuary that pulsed with music, laughter, and footsteps of those who'd once felt voiceless. This was not just the end of a fight. This was the beginning of a garden. Children ran through the front yard now, their fingers brushing over lavender stalks and marigold clusters. A boy in leg braces carried a watering can, his mother watching proudly from the sidewalk. The once dreaded HOA building now stood empty, the president's office sign crooked and gathering dust. No one dared run for the title anymore. Instead, a community coalition had replaced it, a diverse council of residents led not by rules, but by compassion. And today, they hosted the neighborhood's first inclusive garden festival right here at my home. Isaiah arrived first, wearing a press badge he'd made himself. He looked taller now, older, wiser. The shadows that once hung under his eyes had been replaced with purpose. Guess what he said as he helped string paper lanterns between the trees? My first piece got published. It's called "The Woman They Couldn't Push Down." He looked at me, almost shy. "It's about you." I touched his hand. "No, baby. It's about us." By noon, the street was alive with color. Music spilled from speakers on porches. Neighbors brought folding chairs, casseroles, pitchers of sweet tea. A teenage dance group performed between the rows of tomatoes. Someone read poems beside the hydrangeas. Even the mayor showed up without a ribbon, without security, just her in flats carrying a pie. At the center of it all stood the mural, freshly repainted, now surrounded by names of those who had joined the cause. The kids who planted the elders, who marched the single moms who wrote letters. The students who filmed what others ignored. The mural no longer belonged to me. It belonged to everyone who had been stepped over, told to stay small, pushed into metaphorical or literal mud. When my turn came to speak, they quieted. I wheeled to the small stage sun warming my back. "I want to tell y'all something." I began, my voice louder now than it had ever dared to be. When they pushed me into the dirt, they thought they were burying me. But they forgot I'm a seed. The crowd exhaled. Some cheered, some cried. I was never supposed to rise. Not with my color, not with my disability. Not on this street, not in this body, not after that fall. But every time they tried to bury me deeper, I grew stronger roots. Roots that reached others. Roots that built gardens. Gardens that built a new world. I paused, scanning the faces. You see, we don't rise alone. We rise because someone reaches back, because someone refuses to walk by, Because someone like Isaiah chooses to film the truth, not the lie. Because someone like you decides, no more. A standing ovation followed not because I was eloquent, but because I was still here. Later, as the sun dipped behind rooftops and the lanterns blinked to life, I found myself beside the hydrangeas alone for a moment. I closed my eyes and listened not for threats, not for sirens, but for laughter. Real laughter. The kind that doesn't mock, but celebrates. That's when I felt it. The earth had shifted. Not completely, but enough. Enough for a garden to grow, where once there was only cement and fear. Enough for a woman to rise when the world said she should have stayed down. Enough for justice not perfect, not complete, but planted. As Isaiah left that evening, he turned and asked, "Do you think it's over?" I smiled. "Baby, it's never over. But now, we're not fighting in the dark." He nodded, tears in his eyes, and I, Clarice Holloway Black, disabled, widowed, unbroken, wheeled back into my home, not with bitterness, but with bloom in my heart. Because when we rise, we grow. Because when we grow, we bloom for others. And because no matter how deep the mud, sunlight always finds its way back. What they meant to break became the very soil I grew from. They thought pushing a disabled black woman into the mud would silence her, but instead it awakened a fire in her and a movement in all of us. Because justice doesn't start in courtrooms, it starts when someone refuses to stay silent. It starts when we say, enough. This story isn't just about one woman standing up. It's about what happens when a whole community finally stands with her. The mud may stain, but courage plants roots. If you believe in stories that reveal truth, uplift the unheard, and remind us all that dignity has no conditions, subscribe to our channel. Share this video to stand against injustice. And drop a comment below. What would you have done if you saw someone being pushed into the mud? Because when we rise, we grow. And when we grow, we bloom for others.